Hi, I'm Alex Howard, and welcome to this week's episode of In Therapy, real life therapy sessions as they happen. In this week's episode, we'll be exploring the different masks that we wear to hide our authentic self and the challenges and problems that it can cause in our lives. Stay tuned till the end for my top tip on how to live your life more easily from your authentic self. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to be notified as new episodes are released, and follow my other social channels for daily inspiration and support. In this week's episode, we catch up with Katie, who's been going through some major life changes with children leaving home and the breakdown of her marriage. Last time, Katie told me that her husband had moved back into the family home. Although this was positive news, I explained that without proper work, old habits are quick to resurface. So, Katie, welcome back. It's good to see you. How have you been doing?
It was the first time that everybody was home, that everybody had been in the house since we split and since all the kids left last September. And it was just a bit overwhelming for everybody, I think. And I've just started this new job, and we kind of went back into the old way.
Yeah. Which is almost inevitable. Right?
Yeah. It just, everybody kind of just slotted back into their roles, I'm not prepared to slot back into my role. So I kind of fought back. And it's crushing because, again, it's them against me. That's how it feels. And I can feel that emotion when I'm saying that.
What do you feel?
Just injustice. Yeah. And I was supposed to be going out for a meal, like a date night with my husband in our efforts to try and reconcile. And anyway, so I just said, I don't want to go out for a meal with somebody who just hasn't got any ability to, I don't feel that there's anything between us. You can't support me. You jump to protect the kids.
And how was that? How did that receive when you communicated that?
Oh, he said, "Oh, nothing's changed. You're a lunatic. Why do I ever book things when I know you're going to just ruin it?" That's the rhetoric. But actually, I don't take it as I've ruined things. I took that as I'm just not prepared to put myself in that position. I'm not going to go through the motions of going out for a meal because, that's what we should do because we're a married couple. No way. That's not my bag at all. And
you found yourself questioning the decision to reconcile, or?
Yeah.
How was that?
I got to a point where the way he was sitting on the sofa, the way he was eating, the way he was talking, the way he was moving, the way he was breathing, everything was just irritating me. And I thought, this is not about him, this is about me.
Yeah. Good for you.
And I had that kind of penny drop moment. And this is kind of the main thing I wanted to talk to you about today because it's been on my mind. And I recognise that I'm getting cross with him for overeating and being overweight when that's what I'm doing. And for him for not achieving what I want him to achieve because I don't feel like I'm achieving what I want to achieve. For him for not being a certain way because I'm not happy with who I am and where I am and what I'm doing.
Well, how I look at it is there's your stuff, there's his stuff, and there's the collective stuff in the relationship. And each of those three pieces is important. But we can't deal with him because he's not here. And you're doing the couple's work to work with the dynamics in the relationship. The piece that you really can take ownership of is the piece that's you. And I do think that there are things in the dynamics that you describe where the tendency towards you getting scapegoated or you getting ganged up on, which do need work. And I'm sure that's part of what's being done in the couple's work that you guys are doing. But equally, we teach people how to treat us. And we teach people how to treat us by the way we are with them, both in our words and our nonverbal communication. And it sounds like there are places that you go to that also provoke reactions in that dynamic. Or when those dynamics play out, the way that you respond feeds or perpetuates the dynamic rather then shifts it into a different dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's definitely
So,
true.
so I think it's important not to go from it's all his fault to it's all my fault.
Yeah.
It's recognizing you both have your part, and it's not just you as individuals, it's also the dynamics in the relationship. But the piece that you can work on is your stuff.
And I do recognise that, and that's kind of the part, it kind of oscillates between him dealing with his issues, me dealing with my issues, what's going on in between. But this kind of realisation it was almost like it's always been there, this self-loathing, this whole thing about his weight and his lack of exercise and things. It's about me. I know it is. It's me projecting what I feel about myself and how I feel, that I'm this... and I am very emotional about it because it's been on my mind at all, but how I feel that I'm just this freak, this ugly, fat person who's just winging it, who's just faking it in life. That's how I feel, and that's what's bubbled under the surface all the time. And
well, that's how you feel, and what I'm particularly curious about is what makes you feel that way, because what you're describing to me is a really vicious inner critic.
Yeah.
And what I'm also noticing here is when we become close to someone, it's almost like if we have a strong inner critic that tends to be aimed at us, it tends to be aimed at us, and then sometimes it flips and it goes after other people. But the closer we get to someone, the more our inner critic sort of includes, because we kind of merge with them, suddenly our inner critic starts to be on their case as well. So what you're describing is a externalized inner critic onto your husband, where he's getting the same abuse that you're getting. And perhaps sometimes you're externalizing it, speaking it towards him. But the more work that we do on your relationship to you, the more you defend from your inner critic, the more you're in touch with your deeper feelings and traumas and processing them, the less that inner critic is there for both of you.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to say that I'm sort of, my inner critic is criticising him as well. But this is something that I think, as I've sort of torn down these defences over the last couple of years doing this sort of deeper work, that I've been reluctant to recognise. It's been very important for me to keep that image of being very successful, bright, clever, driven. And actually, and I know that it's a problem for me because I'm feeling the emotion when I say it, but I know that I don't really truly believe that about myself. I can't even look at photographs of myself because I think I'm so disgusting, and it's just really been on my mind, and my being so overweight, and I'm even just walking here, I was conscious of it. When, I always remember what you say: if you see it, you don't have to be it. But I'm being it at the moment, and I'm seeing it because I was just looking at all these lovely, beautiful people and thinking, I don't fit into this world.
In Archway?
but it's my perception, and nobody's as fat as I am, and nobody's as ugly as I am, and and I know that. I don't know that it's not true. That's the thing.
Well, I think what you're describing, Katie, is we all have three selves. We have our idealized self, like the self that we think we need to be loved, to be happy, to be successful. We then have our collapsed self, like the self we feel when we feel hopeless and useless, and particularly when we've been attacking and beating ourselves up. We then have our authentic self, our true self. And the more pressure we put on ourselves to be the idealized self, the more we collapse into the collapsed self. Whereas I think I said to you once before that arrogance, for example, comes from a place of deficiency. The more we pump ourselves up, the more we inflate ourselves, we're trying to compensate for that feeling of the collapse and that feeling of not being enough. And what I think you're describing is this sort of oscillation between putting pressure on yourself to try and be this idealized self, and your inner critic attacking you and driving you and beating you up to be there. And then that becomes so exhausting and so unsustainable that you sort of collapse into the collapsed self, and then you feel all of your deficiencies and that you're not enough and you're unlovable. I think what's important is neither of those places are your true self.
I know.
Right? But the way to stop, one of the pathways to stop putting pressure on ourselves to be this idealized self is to heal the you and the collapsed self, to let yourself have those feelings. So I'm really curious as we're talking about it, I can see that there's some emotion that's there. What is that felt sense?
I just think it's a real sadness. It's a real deep sadness and regret that, and I'm tired. I'm just tired. That's what it feels like. I'm just tired. I've just gone down the wrong path for so long in my life, and I'm just not the person. I didn't even know the person I was, and I'm just not the person I think I want to be.
So what you're saying is you're not managing to be the idealized self, but you're not actually sure who you are.
I don't even know what the idealised self is, though.
Well, the idealized self, I'm not sure that's the path I want to go down right now, but just to give you a sort of headline, maybe a piece of work we do at another time.
Sorry.
The idealized self is the you which has the body you think you should have, that has the success in career, that has the kids behaving the way they should be behaving. It's all the ideas of who your inner critic thinks you should be to be lovable, to be happy, to be successful in the world. And it's utterly impossible to achieve. It's utterly overwhelming. And it's a form of self-abuse trying to be that person. Because the more that we try to be the idealized self, the more you're rejecting your authentic self. What you're really saying is, the more we try to be that person, what you're saying is, I'm not enough as I am.
Yeah.
And that's a form of self-harm.
But I don't understand how I've done all this work, doing all this counselling, and I've been all these, this journey for so long, and I've only kind of just, well, I suppose that's the only way I know how to be.
And the work that you've done historically hasn't been wasted. It's just that you've done the work to get to the point to see a deeper realization. What we're talking about here is very, it might sound quite simplistic, but it's actually very deep, sensitive work. It's like, who the fuck are we?
Yeah.
Like, who am I in the world? It's like the most fundamental work, and it takes a level of sort of psycho-emotional maturity and a level of stability to be able to really ask these questions. That's why we start with things like meditation and mindfulness to build the foundation.
Yeah.
To actually relax enough to be able to go, actually, who is the real Katie?
I suppose there's a big fear there that if I drop this image, I suppose, this ego, which is what it is, then what is there? What is my authentic self? Right. Is it just this, lazy, slobby?
Your inner critic believes that
you're good for nothing, thick, got nothing to offer.
Right. Your inner critic is constantly telling you that you are the collapsed self, that you are a slob, you're useless, you're hopeless, you have no motivation, no one likes you. It's constantly telling you you're that. So you're constantly efforting to try and prove to it you're not. You're trying to be this idealized self to prove that you're worthy. The more that we defend against your inner critic, the less you feel in that collapsed place, and the more you connect to your true potential, your true gifts, your true beauty. And your true beauty has nothing to do with the size of your body. It might in the eyes of your inner critic, but your true beauty is not an aesthetic thing. Your true beauty is your energy and your aliveness and what you bring into the world.
It's just that I've just found this, my mind has been very much, I'm on Zoom a lot, I'm constantly saying, you're so ugly. They must just think, what the hell? Your hair is just disgusting. And, everything. That's all it's been doing all week. And I'm just like, and I've been saying, fuck off. Just fuck off. Leave me alone.
So the irony is that your inner critic is telling you two completely contradictory things. It's telling you that you're completely useless and no one cares, and it's telling you that everyone's thinking about you all the time. I think it needs to take a pick. Yeah. Can't have both of those things. Those two things can't coexist.
But it's not even, I've got past that, caring about what people think of me, to be honest. It's all about what I think of myself. And this is what this realisation was, that this is me projecting everything that I think about myself, that I'm fat, lazy, useless piece of shit, basically.
And your inner critic is projecting that onto everyone else. It thinks that's what everyone's thinking.
Specifically onto one person.
Well, yes, and onto others as well. And that's why in work roles, you're feeling this pressure to be this idealized self, because otherwise they'll judge you for being this collapsed self, right? So there's this constant efforting to try to be seen as being on it and being smart and being this and being that and all these things you think you need to be.
How am I still doing this after all this time and all the work that I've been doing? I don't know. That's why I feel, sad and just tired, because I don't know what to do. I don't know where. I don't know how to find.
So I want to just point out what's happening there. You're starting to see something really quite deep and quite fundamental. And then what happens? Your inner critic comes in and it undermines you. And says, oh my God, are you still seeing this? How slow are you? Why haven't you resolved this years ago? That is your inner critic, right? So at the very moment that things open up and you start to see something, it slams you and puts you back in your box.
Yeah.
There are many layers to these structures. You're seeing something that you've seen before in a different way. You're going deeper into yourself, partly because of the work you've been doing with your meditation practice and making a bit more space and connecting to yourself more emotionally. You're able to go to a deeper place. When we do that, the old patterns fight almost harder to bring things back to the way that things were before.
Yeah.
The key step at this point, and there'll be more work to do around this, but the key step is stepping up your defending against your inner critic. Now, we can bring in the subsequent sessions some other ways of working with the inner critic. I know at the moment that the fuck off is a good place to be working with it. I'd really like to work on building awareness of this dynamic. So I know we did some more generic awareness before with the inner critic, but particularly the way that the inner critic is projected onto your husband and onto other people, but also how it's telling you are this collapsed version of yourself. And this effort that's going into being this idealized self. If we could really put a spotlight on that over the next few weeks, I think that could be really quite transformative.
Yeah.
And as a foundation for us then to do some deeper work around these different aspects that are there. There's a few ways you can do this. I think probably the most helpful way is to do it as we've done before, as a journal at the end, a thought diary at the end of the day of what are the different ways in that day that you can see this dynamic that's playing out.
Yep.
I don't want you to underestimate. We're getting into really sensitive psychological work here. And it's very easy for your inner critic to undermine you and say, oh my God, all these years. But this is the sort of psychological work that a lot of people never get to, because it's delicate. And it's like we're addressing the fundamental questions of life. Who is Katie?
Yeah.
That's big stuff. And it's sensitive stuff. And it's all the more reason why you need to have enough defense from your inner critic to be able to be really gentle with yourself through this work.
And I my default is to say, I'm back at square one and I've made no progress. But I know that I wouldn't have the inner strength to do this if I hadn't done the work.
Totally. And one way to think about it, it's a bit like a spiral. So you come to the same themes, but you come to them at a higher level of development each time you come to them. So it's the same work. You're not picking up completely new psychological shit. It's the same stuff, but the you that's coming to it is more sophisticated, has more capacity, and is able to go deeper with it.
Yeah. So then the voice in my head said, well, you haven't got much life left, so what's the point? How do I address that?
By the fact you even saw that.
Yeah.
Right? Because you could have just walked home and gone, well, what Alex said would have been great 20 years ago, but actually you would have bought it. Whereas actually what happened was that came in and you went, hang on, that is my inner critic.
Yeah, I did.
So you haven't bought that story. Yeah. So that's a great example of what you need to be doing, is to have the awareness so you don't get pulled into your inner critic's narrative.
But I still kind of believe that.
Yeah. And
I'm 51 now, aren't I? And
Well, the majority of people, my observation, don't start real psycho-emotional work until they get halfway through life anyway, right? Because either life hasn't been tough enough, or they haven't got the immaturity, or they haven't got the time, or they haven't got the resources.
Yeah.
So you're right in the sweet spot of people doing this work.
Yeah. And there is a sort of calmer, greater life out there. Because I think that's a big thing for me, is the regret as well, just looking back at all the mistakes and this.
But again, without wanting to lump everything down to the same thing, that's another example of your inner critic. What's the point in starting now? You've already fucked your life up. You've got all these things that you've done wrong. That again is your inner critic in action.
Yeah, yeah.
Every day, every year of your life is precious. We're all going to live longer than we would have done in the past. Yeah. The things that killed people 20 years ago don't kill people generally now. You've got plenty of good years left. So this is a great time to be doing this work.
Yeah.
Hope you found this week's episode helpful. This idea of the different masks that we wear, the different versions of ourselves, the clap self, the idealized self, and the authentic self, I find an incredibly helpful model. And do look out for my upcoming free 3-part video series on how to heal from emotional trauma, where I get into the heart model of understanding how do we get in the way of our healing, and how do we get in the way of being our authentic self. That video series will bring these ideas to life much more. But here's my top tip on how to live more easily from your authentic self. Understand, who is this idealized self? Who is this version of yourself that you believe you need to be loved, to be liked, to feel safe, to be acceptable in the world? If you can penetrate that with your awareness, if you can see through that idealized self, it loses its power. Then becomes much easier to make contact with and to live from our authentic self. It is a practice, it takes time, but the more we can see it, the less we find ourselves being it. Next week on In Therapy, we're going to be catching up with David. I set David some homework last time about understanding the different blocks and ideas and beliefs and unprocessed parts of his history in the way of being in an intimate relationship. In next week's episode, I set David some challenging homework around setting up an online dating profile and putting himself back out in the world.
Last time I saw you, we were particularly talking about relationships and some of the potential blocks. I've been curious as to what's come from that reflection.
A fatalism.
Almost like this is how it's always been, this is how it's always going to be, this is who you are, this is your lot, in a sense.
Things that I'm unhappy with and things that I don't feel adequate about.